While it's becoming widely understood that nutrition plays an essential role in optimal mental health, it can be really difficult to get your kids to be willing to eat nutritious food. In this video, I'll share with you all my tips and tricks to get children to eat more nutrition in their diets and slowly over time shift your family towards an optimal health dietary lifestyle. Let me start by saying that I understand as a mom how difficult it can be to get your children to eat the nutritious food that you would so desperately like them to eat. I remember saying to a friend that my least favorite part of parenting young kids was trying to feed my kids 3 times a day. I have a really in-depth lecture all about essential nutrients for mental health, and I have another video about how to get your kids to love vegetables. But in this short video, I thought that I would share some of my specific little food tricks that I've used with my own family to try to increase their dense nutrition in their diet without them feeling deprived or even realizing that there is a lot of nutrition packed in that food that looks like pretty yummy food. So, how do we do this? First of all, I would tell you, be patient and start with slow, gradual changes with your family. You don't want to suddenly announce that all their treats are going to be taken away. But over time, you can slowly shift the groceries that you buy, slowly tweak your recipes, sneak in little bits of more nutrition, and the gradual transition in the family diet won't even be noticeable. So I thought we'll start with some of our breakfast foods and then move throughout the day with different food ideas. In America, for whatever reason, our standard breakfasts do not tend to be very nutritious. So we tend to eat a lot of simple carbohydrates and sweet foods that include wheat and sugar. So for example, pancakes are a food that most kids enjoy for breakfast, but a white flour pancake made with homogenized milk with butter and a corn syrup-based fake maple syrup is probably not the best way to start your child's day. It's really a huge blood sugar spike followed by a crash and doesn't give your child that sustainable energy to get through their day. So we can still make things like pancakes and waffles, but we want to think about the ways we can add more nutrition to them. First of all, it's really worth considering if your child does well with gluten or not, and if your child's having any significant mental health or brain development, or even chronic physical health struggles, I would encourage you to try an elimination diet for a period of a few weeks, removing wheat and dairy, and then seeing how your child does. When we reintroduce those foods back into our child's life, we can see if symptoms come back. But assuming that your child does tolerate wheat and dairy okay, I'll talk about the way that my family approaches these foods. So it's useful to know that you can blend things like white flour with something healthier like a sprouted whole grain flour, like sprouted whole grain spelt. Or you can mix some flour with gluten-free flour, and maybe even be able to move towards using only gluten-free flour in your recipes. I don't think gluten-free flours are a health food by any means, but if we can reduce some of the burden on the digestive system by minimizing gluten in the diet, then we're going to help our children and ourselves have overall better systemic health. Gluten, unfortunately, causes slow damage to the intestinal lining. So we can mix up our flours, possibly add in some sprouted whole grain or even gluten-free flours and mix those together. You might add some ancient grain flours like einkorn or kamut. So there's many different flours out there, and we can blend them together maybe with some white flour and still have the pancakes taste really good. From flour, we think about milk. Now, usually recipes call for cow's milk, and again, cow's milk can be detrimental to the health of our digestive system and our systemic overall health. And so there's better milks than others. If you want to stick with cow's milk, it's ideal to find raw, grass-fed, not pasteurized cow's milk. That's not even sold in some states, but if you're lucky enough to live where there are farmers that can sell raw milk, that's the ideal way to go. The other thing to consider is finding cow's milk that has an A2 protein versus an A1. So you'll see this now on grocery store shelves, and it's usually in the organic milk section, but it'll say A2 grass-fed cow's milk typically. So we'd like it to be grass-fed and have an A2 protein, again, easier for the body to digest, less damage to the digestive intestinal wall. And alternatively, if we can move away from cow's milk, it's probably ideal some of the time to at least minimize dairy in our family's diet. We can just make our own nut milk right there in the blender with the pancake batter. So what I do for my waffles, pancakes, and crepes is I just use warm water with a handful of almonds, some coconut, and some hemp seed, and some chia and flax seed. And you can just blend those up on high speed in your blender to start your recipe and just really blend it thoroughly to make kind of a frothy nut milk. I don't strain it, I don't worry about it. That just gives me a milk base to then make my pancakes from. So almonds, coconut, hemp seed, and then you might add flax and chia. Flax and chia seed are something that I try to put in a lot of our food, so any of the baked goods that I make and smoothies. And the way that I store them is I buy them in bulk. I like the company called Jaffe Bros, Jaffe. They have the best price on bulk seeds and nuts that I have found. And I buy them in bulk, keep them in my freezer, and then I'll usually put in the blender 1 cup of each, blend it down to turn it into ground flax and chia, put that in a jar, and keep it in the freezer so the seeds do not go rancid. And it's also then just really quick and simple to just pull out my jar from the freezer. I just usually pour some into the lid of the jar and dump it in. I don't really measure anything like that. But some flax and chia seeds to continue to get some of those healthy fatty acids from seeds in our diet. So we can have our mix of flours, perhaps including some gluten-free flour. We can make our own milk alternative through blending nuts and seeds and coconut with some water. And then we can use a milk that comes from grass-fed cows and is either raw or has that A2 protein. So that's going to give you a much healthier base to your pancakes. I also will add turmeric. Now, I know that might sound gross, but turmeric is weird in that the flavor does not come out in foods. And it really has more of just that strong golden color, that yellow color of turmeric, but the flavor seems to just blend into the rest of the ingredients in the recipe. So I usually put about a teaspoon of turmeric in most things that I cook, including baked goods and sweet goods. So I keep turmeric in my cabinet, and I do actually mix it with what's called bioperin, which is the active ingredient from black pepper. Probably an unnecessary step, but the research would tell us that turmeric is more bioavailable when mixed with black pepper. That works great in things like soups and chili and stew and Mexican food, but don't really want to put black pepper in my pancakes, and so I mix in some bioperin powder with my turmeric ahead of time. Turmeric in everything because it's an anti-inflammatory. It's been shown to be helpful in treating depression, probably because of the anti-inflammatory properties. It's that beautiful gold polyphenol, so that plant nutrient that is so beneficial. It's shown to be helpful in cancer and overall immune function, also headaches, any inflammatory conditions. So turmeric is a really nice thing to just put in little bits often into our family's meals. I also add cinnamon to things like pancakes and waffles. Cinnamon's a great spice, and just the more herbs and spices we can keep in our diet for that broad diversity of antioxidants and nutrients, the better. If I'm making pancakes, I will probably opt to make blueberry pancakes. Just everywhere you can put berries in your diet, the better. Again, berries, those rich dark purples and reds, giving us so much good nutrition and antioxidant value. As far as sugar goes, typically pancakes and waffle recipes call to put in white sugar. I would recommend you try using part of that sugar as date sugar. Date sugar is just dried, ground up whole dates, and those have some nice minerals and nutrition in them. So perhaps some date sugar and minimizing the overall sugar you put in. You might be surprised that if you even put in, say, 2/3 of the sugar that a recipe calls for, your food still tastes sweet enough. So always reducing sugar where you can is helpful for overall and for mental health. So once you've made your pancakes with your alternative flours, your alternative milks, added in some turmeric and cinnamon, and used maybe less sugar or date sugar, now we can think about enjoying those pancakes with typically butter and syrup. If you can, I'd recommend that you buy grass-fed butter. Also has a higher fat-soluble nutrient profile, things like vitamin A and E. And so we want grass-fed butter, that more rich yellow-toned butter when possible. And real maple syrup, also a wonderful alternative to a false maple syrup made with corn syrup and caramel coloring. So we ideally will splurge that little budget item to buy real maple syrup and really savor that when we have pancakes and waffles. So that is how I would recommend that you make pancakes or baked goods in the morning for your family. Add in some cinnamon and turmeric and nuts and seeds, chia and flax, alternate sugars, alternate flours, alternate milks, and then using real butter, real maple syrup when you want to enjoy those. Perhaps your child likes to eat cereal in the morning, which can be really convenient, especially when you're in a time crunch. So again, I'd look for boxed cereals that have no added sugar. That's ideal. Also organic grains, ideally, because there's such a high level of pesticides on things like oats and wheat. Cheerios have been found to have one of the highest pesticide content of Roundup or glyphosate, which is so damaging to the health of the digestive system. So ideally organic, no added sugar, and then seeing about maybe a cereal that has in it some almonds or flax or nuts and seeds mixed in to make it more of a whole grain cereal. And then again, if you can use either raw milk or A2 milk or your own nut milk, that would be ideal. I think smoothies are a really essential part of healthy family life, and they're just such a quick meal. I have a whole video on all the things I like to put in my smoothies, but start so that your smoothies taste really yummy, and then over time start to tweak them by adding half an avocado, which you can keep in the freezer. Never let avocados go bad once they're ripe. If you can't use them, freeze them. Just throw them in a bag and put them right into your smoothie without the skin in the pit. Leafy greens, add a little bit of spinach. That tends to completely disappear in a smoothie. Greens powders, so finding a non-flavored powdered mix of greens can give you a little boost of nutrition. And so there's many things we can put in our smoothies to make them a nutritious meal, a meal replacement. But usually with kids, we want to kind of start slow, make them mostly with just berries and banana, maybe with your own nut milk again, or pomegranate juice, and then ease in more of those essential nutrients, things like whey protein powder. Turmeric can go in a smoothie, chia and flax or hemp seeds. Just adding in a little bit more nutrition as you go and trying to make sure they still taste good, but that your child is just once or twice a week at least getting this really nutrient-dense meal in the form of a fruit smoothie. I think most kids who can eat peanuts really like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So as far as bread goes, first of all, we should minimize. So ideally, we don't have a lot of bread in our diet. If you are able to make your own sourdough, that is so wonderful. And you can mix your sourdough white flour with, again, some whole or sprouted grain flour blends. And if you can find real sourdough, truly fermented sourdough, that's wonderful. Or you can buy sprouted grain flours and maybe, again, try gluten-free flours in case your child might be having some inflammation reactions eating wheat and gluten. So start with a healthier bread if you can. And then for peanut butter, we want to make sure we're not buying the type that has a lot of sugar, ideally no added sugar and no hydrogenated oils in your peanut butter. So your peanut butter ingredients should just be peanuts and salt. And so start with a peanut butter, which has a great taste that we mostly love. And then we can use a hand mixer and blend into that a jar of almond butter, half a jar of cashew butter, maybe a quarter of a jar of sunflower butter. And then we can add in those extra healthy fats and nuts and seeds and still have this nut butter that just really tastes like peanut butter. So that's a great way to make your peanut butter sandwiches. And then you might consider using raw honey rather than jam. So again, just reducing sugar where we can. Maybe your child would like a banana peanut butter sandwich, so a little bit of banana on the bread with the peanut butter. So get creative, but think about how can we do a PBJ, but in a way that's a pretty nutritious, valuable meal in my child's day. As far as veggies go, I again have a lecture more about how to help your child learn to love vegetables, but I would encourage you to start with little pieces of raw veggies on their plate with lunch and dinner every day. It can be helpful if you cut those into creative shapes, if you have a little bit of a rainbow color spread, kind of showing all the beautiful different colors of plants when they're put together. Start with sweeter vegetables like raw carrot, red bell pepper. Little dipping sauces maybe can be a helpful way to get your child to be willing to try to eat those veggies. If they are willing to use hummus and guacamole, those are our healthiest dip choices. You could also make a seed dip out of like sunflower or pumpkin seeds with some garlic and olive oil. But think about healthy dips that your child might like the dip enough to be willing to eat the raw veggie. But regardless, from the youngest age you can, give them even just 2 little pieces of raw veggies on their plate with dinner and with lunch. And have a bit of a rule in the family. Like, we have to eat those in order to have dessert later. So we don't want to fight about food. We're not going to force them. We can't force them to eat those veggies. But we can say, that's fine. It's your choice to not eat your 2 pieces of raw veggie. But we're not going to have dessert tonight if you're not willing to try them. And so we have to kind of have a little bit of a boundary there to say you can't reject them outright. You have to at least have 1 bite of those veggies and show me that you're willing to try. And over time, it'll just be an expectation that they know isn't going to go anywhere. Mom expects that every time we eat lunch and dinner. Okay, moving into dinner, let's hope we can have pizza once in a while. Again, assuming wheat and dairy are okay for your child, it can be wonderful to enjoy a pizza sometimes as a family. And maybe you can go out and pick up a pizza and bring it home, or get take and bake or a frozen pizza, but don't eat it as it comes. Add nutrients on top of your pizza. So this is a time to add maybe some extra veggies. You can cut up some black olives or mushrooms, a little bit of onion or garlic. You can do a sprinkle of oregano, of rosemary, maybe basil or an Italian herb mix. And even a little pepper flakes, they can enjoy a little bit of spice. So look at that pizza as it comes and think, well, what can I add to this to add to the nutritional value of this meal in a way that actually gives it more flavor, benefit from those herbs and spices, and give us all those beautiful antioxidants and polyphenols that we need that come from herbs and spices. I would recommend the same thing with pasta sauce. If you buy pasta sauce in a jar, don't just eat it as it comes. Add in some raw garlic and some basil and oregano and thyme and rosemary. Add to the herbs and the garlic and really boost the nutrition of that pasta sauce. I think a lot of kids don't like soup, and they think the reason they don't like soup is because there are large chunks of cooked vegetables, like chunks of carrot and celery. And I think for a lot of kids that has a texture and a flavor that they are just resistant to. And so my trick with getting my kids to be willing to eat soup was by starting to use my blender to small chop my veggies. So that meant for the carrot, celery, onion, maybe zucchini, mushrooms, garlic, I would put it in my blender with water, tiny chop these veggies, and then pour them through a mesh strainer, and then cook the veggies from there. And then reuse the water you strain out to blend your next batch of veggies. Once your veggies have cooked down, add that veggie water to the soup pot as a broth. So part of the broth would be the water left over from blending the veggies. So I think what that does is it makes the veggies really imperceptible. It all blends together in kind of just a monotonous soup texture that includes all those veggies, but with nothing identifiable in there and not much to really chew that might turn off a child who has a little bit of a sensory struggle with vegetables. Also in my soups, I'm going to make those with my homemade bone and veggie broth. So if you have freezer space, you want to save all of your bones from your meat and all of your veggie scraps, like the outer layer of an onion, the stalks from kale, the ends of celery or carrots. If mushrooms get a little, shriveled up in your fridge, throw those in your freezer bag, stems of broccoli. So all of these veggie scraps are waste, it costs us nothing to keep them. And once you have a few bags of bones and veggies in the freezer, you can put those in a stock pot and simmer it for a whole day, at least 24 hours with a bit of vinegar. A little bit of vinegar will pull out more of the minerals from the bones, and then we can strain it and use that for soups. I also use that bone and veggie broth for cooking rice and cooking beans. And so where I can, I like to get that bone veggie broth in our meals. And so that's part of soup. And then I'm always going to add turmeric and as many herbs as fit into that recipe. So we want to have tiny veggies and a lot of flavor. and use that bone broth with all those nice minerals. For afternoon snacks, we often are drawn to grabbing crackers or potato chips, and I would encourage you to think about what are some alternatives to a crunchy, salty snack that maybe will teach my child to be more comfortable with vegetables. So I was lucky that one of my sons, his favorite food he discovered as a little boy was kale chips. And so they're really expensive to buy pre-made in the store. So I just learned how to make kale chips on our own and tweaked a recipe over time until we found one that we really like. And so I like to make kale chips and then actually keep those in bags in the freezer. And so that's ready to grab when we want them. And then rather than potato chips or corn chips, you might think about buying those chips in the store that are made from root vegetables. So they're usually just things like beet or turnips that are dried with some salt and oil. And so that might give you a little bit more nutritional value than potato chips. We do like popcorn in my family, and so sometimes our dinner will actually be a smoothie followed by popcorn. But the popcorn I make, I prefer to always buy organic, non-GMO corn. So we have to be really wary with corn because so much of it now is genetically modified. And so organic corn, if you can find the ancient grains, colorful corn, that's kind of fun and maybe a little more nutrition in there. And then we air pop it and then make it with grass-fed butter, pink Himalayan mineral salt, so just that salt that has more mineral content. Sea salt would also be wonderful, or gray Celtic sea salt is great. And then nutritional yeast. And so nutritional yeast has this nice kind of buttery, cheesy flavor and a lot of B vitamins. And so that's how we enjoy popcorn, for a little salty treat. You'll hear that white rice is not really the best food to eat because it has a high glycemic index and low nutritional value. But sometimes rice is really nice to have with a meal, and kids seem to like rice typically. But you can make rice a little bit healthier, so you might think about switching out from plain white rice and instead moving towards like a brown jasmine whole grain rice. So brown jasmine rice does not have much of a flavor. And then rather than just cooking it with water, you can do some water with some of that bone veggie broth that you've made, so adding in that nutrition of the veggie broth. And then also a sheet of kombu seaweed. So kombu is a type of kelp, and you can just buy it dried in bags, and you can just put a square piece about that big into a batch of rice. And then once the rice is cooked, you can remove the seaweed, but you'll have absorbed into the rice a lot of the minerals and especially iodine. Not a lot of foods have iodine in them, seaweed being the main one. And so if we can cook our beans or rice with some seaweed, that gives us a little bit of iodine in our diet. Also in rice, I like to add some mixed herbs. So depending what I'm cooking the rice for, I'll probably add some turmeric yet again. I'll probably add either some mixed Italian herbs, or like I just have these no salt herbal blends that I have bought at Costco that has like basil and onion and garlic and just a whole mix of spices. And I'll just add in a spoonful of those herbs. If it's in the summer, I might add in some parsley or some basil or chives or garlic and just add in some herbs and spices into my rice. As far as desserts go, I think it's really nice to have dessert sometimes. I think a fruit cobbler can be a wonderful way to go. So maybe it's made with berries, like strawberries with pears or apples. So whatever fruit you have, and then you can make a topping that will include probably some brown sugar and butter and flour. But you can add to that pecans, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, cinnamon, turmeric, nutmeg, maybe do some date sugar with your brown sugar, and maybe some coconut oil with some grass-fed butter. And so just making the topping for that crisp as healthy as you can. So that can be a really nice way to enjoy a fruity dessert. If we're ever making cookies in my family, then we're going to add in things like walnuts, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, some chia and flax ground up, maybe some turmeric or cinnamon to the cookies, maybe some date sugar with our regular sugar, and again, reducing the total sugar in every recipe that we cook. And so we can really enjoy cookies, and of course, add in some chocolate chips, but opt for dark chocolate, real chocolate chips. And so it's still a yummy cookie, but in there is a lot of nutrition so that it's not just an empty kind of sugar bomb cookie, but it's a nutritional treat. So there's good nutrients along with it being a yummy treat. If your child does like chocolate or candies, try to go to the health food store for those. Look for organic fruit treats, so not made with high fructose corn syrup. So you can buy gummy worms and jelly beans, but from the health food store where they don't have the red food dye and they don't have that high fructose corn syrup. So maybe look for an alternative in the candy that is a little bit healthier and less toxins for the body to deal with. And then for chocolate, opting for real chocolate. So at least, maybe 50 or 60% cocoa. Dark chocolate is great, and trying to find one that's maybe organic, and just, again, always reading those ingredient lists and avoiding corn syrup. So these are some ways that I feed my family. I try to add in a lot of herbs and spices wherever I can. Whenever I'm cooking something, I'm thinking, well, what else can I put in this that would taste okay, that has that nutritional value? So more spices and more herbs, trying to reduce sugar, and where I can, maybe add in some date sugar, trying to add in seaweed to rice, and turmeric in about just everything I cook. And thinking about, we do eat wheat, but how can we minimize just pure white flour and either make sourdough or add in those ancient grains or some sprouted grain. And then we do consume dairy in my family, but trying to mostly choose grass-fed and organic if possible, raw milk or A2 protein milk if possible, and then wherever I can, just making my own nut milk just on the fly, using the blender, some water with nuts and seeds to make a milk alternative. So I hope this gives you some little sneaky trick ideas, ways to add in more nutrition without the food looking bad or tasting bad, getting your children to slowly be okay with vegetables, what they look like, smell like, taste like, sneaking them in little bits, cutting them into pretty shapes, adding some dipping sauces, making them crispy and salty like in kale chip form. So really being creative and thinking about how can I still make pancakes, but maybe make blueberry pancakes and add in some different ingredients that'll help them be more nutritionally valuable for my child. Little side note, when I make things like pancakes and waffles and cookies, I like to make a double batch and keep them in the freezer so we have more to last longer. I figure if I'm cooking one batch, it doesn't take too much effort to just double that and make some extra. Good luck, moms and dads. I really know that feeding children is a difficult job and can be very frustrating, but I promise your efforts will pay off. Just start with yourself, model those good choices, praise them when they're willing to try a new food, keep it light, keep it fun, get your kids in the kitchen with you, putting their hands in the food and seeing how it all comes to be. And slowly over time, tweak your ingredients and recipes just a bit and start adding in more nutritional density into the foods that your family already enjoys. Over time, all of your health will benefit and you'll have a happier, healthier family. Thank you for joining me at Root Cause of Happiness. If this information was useful to you, please share it with others seeking knowledge and tools for resilience. It is a meaningful contribution to the world when we become proactive in our healing journeys, by learning and growing, by increasing our awareness, by addressing the root cause of happiness.